All right, and welcome back. And this is another episode of Realize the Self, and I'm your host, Mark. And in today's episode, I thought it would be wise to go over first chapter of the book, and Realize the Self coming out next month. Should be the end of February. I have a tentative date of 2/22/26, just because it's a cool date with all those twos. And so we're about a month out now. So here we go. Let's go over the book, the table of contents. I'll go over that real quick before we start. First, we have a preface, intro. Then chapter 1 is called Know Thyself. Chapter 2 is the happiness myth. Chapter 3, I go over neuroscience and brainwaves. Chapter 4 is the different energy bodies. Chapter 5 is a Satori experience and what that is. Chapter 6 is chakras, or chakras, however you want to say them. Chapter 7's enlightened yogi. Chapter 8's more influences on brainwaves and all the different factors that influence brainwaves. And number 9 is, are you done suffering? Number 10, the 3 main techniques. Number 11, the supplemental tools. Number 12, self-realization pyramids. Cool pyramid I made to self-realization with all the different practices and concepts. And Chapter 13 is pendulums, love, and karma. 14, more on neuroscience. 15 is specifically go and investigate delta brainwaves. This is a pretty interesting chapter. Chapter 16, we talk more about the ego. Chapter 17 is complementary practices, exercises, and techniques that I go over. There's about 30 different ones listed, and it's a really great chapter with a ton of complementary practices and exercises you could do along with the big 3 major ones we talk about. And the last chapter would be the finish line, and then I have references. There's about 100 or a little more than 100 references in the book, and then there's a 3 bonuses section that I added, which is really cool. We have a 4-month self-realization program, and then we have a 4-month self-realization roadmap, and then we also have a 4-month self-realization workbook. So this is all added as bonuses in the end of the book. And so let's go over the first chapter right now. And actually, let's go over the preface, intro, and then chapter 1. So here's the preface. The stories presented here are in reference to Mark, who is an actor, a character in the dreamlike illusory world we exist in. I am not Mark, which refers to the egoic mind, body, identity. I am that which has no name, the nameless, the ineffable, pure awareness, the true self, as are you. The self that comes from the light that bore the light, Atman, Brahman, the pleroma, the monad, non-duality, and many other names. I am just passing through this world as we all are. Mark is just an avatar in this dreamlike, illusory, holographic AI world we are passing through. With the examination of science and ancient teachings, we will walk step by step on how to realize the self and awaken to one's true essence. We are not the body, we are not the mind, we are pure awareness, that which is aware of itself. That is who we are, the chainless, changeless, and the nameless. Any and all words cease to adequately describe the true self. Nevertheless, throughout the book, I will do my best to convey the closest essence to the self as possible. The cause of ignorance, as noted in Vedic Buddhist and Gnostic teachings, is from the misidentification of the true self with the mind and body. This is not the cause of man's suffering. This is the root cause of man's suffering and imprisonment. We are already free and awakened, yet it is only the mind that covers the realization of the self. I cannot urge one enough to pursue self-realization. This pursuit is of the utmost fundamental importance, and all faculties should be focused towards the pursuit of the self. Self-realization is a process where the self is realized more and more, little by little. That gap in between thought widens ever so slightly. In that place where the self resides is the place of true and infinite happiness. That neither comes nor goes, that which was never born, and that which will never die. That is the self. In the state of self-realization, one can abide in the true self and be forever in serenity, equanimity, happiness, infinite love, and ultimate freedom. Realizing the self is the only way to have permanent happiness. You are happiness itself. There is nothing to do, nowhere to go. Simply be who you already are, the self. Happiness, peace, serenity, infinite love is one's very nature. You are that. And then I add in a quote by Ramana Maharshi. Man's search for happiness is an unconscious search for his self. And then another one by Ramana Maharshi. Your own self-realization is the greatest service you can render the world. And then I add a note here. I will use terms such as enlightenment, gnosis, self-realization, realizing self interchangeably, as well as Atman, Brahman, divine spark, are all used to reference the self. And now we go into the introduction. This book is for the serious pursuer of truth, of consciousness, and of one's true essence and existence. This book is meant to be a means to aid one in realizing the self, the true self, beyond the mind and all rational understanding. So nothing written will adequately express the concept of the self fully. Only by the experience of one's true self can one fully understand that which is beyond understanding and that which is beyond words. The true self can only be experienced. It cannot be understood or expressed, as that implies the mind, and the mind cannot grasp that which is beyond the mind. The knowledge of the self, or gnosis, transcends the mind and any rational understanding. The realization of the self can be done through a systematic and rigorous approach that we will thoroughly go over in this book that can lead to self-realization, and rather quickly. Anyone can realize the self, but not everyone will. This is for those that wish to wake up from this dream of existence, for those that wish to escape the prison of this reality as imposed by the mind and external sources. This book is not meant for those that want a better jail cell, a better dream, or a better section in the prison. This is for those that wish to wake up to the ultimate truth and break the chains of bondage forever. And then I add a quote here from the Chandogya Upanishad 8.2.6. Those who depart hence without having found here the self and those real desires, for them there is no freedom in all the worlds. But those who depart hence having found here the self and those real desires, for them in all the worlds, there is freedom. Also from the Chandogya Upanishad 8.7.3, the two said, the self which is free from evil, free from old age, free from death, free from grief, free from hunger and thirst, whose desire is the real, whose thought is the real, he should be sought. Him one should desire to understand. He who has found out, he who understands the self, he obtains all worlds and all desires. The realization of the self can be done, and you can do it if you so choose to. Many ancient writings and teachings describe the process of self-realization, often in mysterious and hidden ways. The hidden teachings of self-realization were quite possibly the original teachings of Christianity, as well as the teachings of Hinduism, Buddhism, and the Greek and Egyptian mystery schools, which we will touch upon throughout this book. Using a systematic and scientific approach, coupled with ancient wisdom and techniques, anyone can realize the self, and quite quickly, usually in a matter of months, depending on how much time and effort one puts into it. This can be done quite fast, days or weeks, but mostly months. On rare occasions, self-realization can happen instantly. I would encourage everyone to not waste any time and go full steam ahead as soon as possible towards realizing the self. Tomorrow is never guaranteed, and one may miss their chance to escape from this dreamlike existence, this prison of reality, and from the cycle of reincarnation. If you're reading this now, you have more of a head start to self-realization than most of humanity. Do not waste this precious life in the chase of illusory pleasure and material possessions. That will never bring permanent happiness. Instead, focus all of one's might and energy on transcending this illusory world and realize the self. The finite can never give infinite happiness. Only the infinite can. And that is your true nature, your true self. You are that. Why realize the self? Because escaping karma and reincarnation, as indicated by the Vedic teachings of the Upanishads, as well as Buddhism and Gnosticism, real happiness, peace, serenity, everlasting happiness, and infinite love can only be found when one realizes the self. Aside from that, one is trapped on a hamster wheel of duality, pain and pleasure, happiness and sadness, good and bad, desire and aversion, etc. To get off the treadmill of duality and madness, one must realize the self. It's really not that hard nor difficult to realize the self. Self-realization is our natural state. We have just simply forgotten. Self-realization takes some effort and diligence, as anything does, as well as guidance and knowledge to do so. May this book help you navigate the journey back to the self. This book has not found you for no reason. Use this opportunity wisely, as not everyone has it. The methods and teachings I have indicated in here are not the end-all be-all, but they are a good addition on this not-so-well-trodden path. The most important aspect is the desire. If one has the ultimate desire to realize the self, then one will find a way, or the way will find you. With utmost sincerity and desire, the self within will help one break through this reality and aid one's journey by piercing through the veil of this illusory dreamlike world. Once the self is realized, all desires will vanish. Even the desire that brought one to realize the self will vanish, and there will only be the self. The self is everything. The self is limitless. The self is infinity times infinity. The self is you. As mentioned, we will combine ancient teachings with science in the form of brainwaves to aid self-realization. We will see how much of our emotions and thoughts are not from our true self and are shaped by external and internal circumstances beyond our control. In fact, neither our emotions, mind, nor body are our true self. We will go over the three main techniques to realize the self backed by science and brainwaves, such as the forgiveness process, the release technique, and the self-inquiry method. In addition, we will go over practical preparation methods to form a foundational approach to these techniques and finish off with miscellaneous writings and ideas upon different subjects in relation to self-realization. A good part of this book is simply the knowledge of the self. One could do all the methods provided, but if one does not learn the teachings from a qualified teacher that conveys these secret teachings, then one will have a difficult time. Allow this book to be your teacher and guide. Eventually, as one becomes more and more acquainted with the self within and the self without, everywhere and nowhere, it will become one's own guiding force. Ultimately, you are your own teacher. You are your own guru. Let the self guide you. What really got me interested in self-realization was finding out the link between brainwaves and consciousness by having attended a neurofeedback training. I was blown away at the science and the evidence that supports the connection between science and spirituality. Of course, once one realizes the self, everything must go, including neuroscience, brainwaves, and the egoic self, which includes the mind and body, which is not us. We are not the mind. We are not the body. We are not the emotions. We are the pure awareness that transcends all of these. As mentioned before, the root cause of man's suffering can be linked to the misidentification of the true self with the mind or ego in what the ancient Vedic texts call avidya, or ignorance. What self-realization is simply the detachment from the identification with the mind and body and the awareness, and to the awareness, witness, observer within. That is the true self, and you are that. Who are we? Who is the self? What is the self? Our true self resides in our heart center, right here, and is called the divine spark in Gnostic teachings, and called Atman in Vedic teachings. Our true self is traditionally taught to be located in a secret cave-like dwelling called the Guha, in the heart center the size of one's thumb, according to many ancient Vedic texts, specifically the Katha, Chandogya, Mundaka, and Brihadaranyaka Upanishads. These texts have been around for over 2,000 years. Most people have not heard of them. This information seems to be purposely hidden or distorted from the general public. The three main teachings I will use to validate and express the ideas and facts to aid one to self-realization stems from three main traditions, as well as science, personal experiences, and observations. Those three main ancient traditions are from Gnosticism, Advaita Vedanta, a branch of Hinduism, as well as Buddhism, and to a smaller extent, the ancient Egyptian and Greek teachings from the mystery schools. Not to say this book is a religious book per se, far from that. This is a book for everyone. This is a book that incorporates ancient ideas to come to a conclusion as to who we really are and how to remember our true self. Hence the term, realize the self. We are already that. It is only the mind that covers us up. We must peel back the mind, which has its firm grip on the self, and realize our true nature. Another term for self-realization is enlightenment, but I prefer realize the self as it has a more direct meaning, at least from my non-understanding understanding of the term. As for the term enlightenment, it has been watered down by the New Age movement, and certain organizations use a term to profit off the backs of unsuspecting people. For nearly everyone, self-realization is a state of realizing the true self in little bits here and there, bouncing in and out of it as the egoic mind reigns its control less and less until a point is made where the amount of time one abides in the self is greater than the amount of time one resides in the ego or mind, aka the non-self. In addition, the term self-realization seems to be a better description of the message I wish to convey. Self-realization is simply realizing who we and you already are. There is nothing to strive for, as it is a process of letting go of everything we are not. In Sanskrit, this is called neti neti, meaning not this, not that. Self-realization is peeling back the layers of an onion to get to the core, which is the self that shines with the brightness of a million suns times infinity. You are that. As you read this book, forget everything you were taught or think you know. The self transcends thought and thinking. We will challenge some deeply held beliefs and programs that may shock you to your very core. But it is not the real you who will be shocked. It is simply the ego's natural reaction to try and hold on to its fictitious self. As we dissolve the ego and begin to understand without understanding that the ego mind is not real, we will find that which is real, and that is the true self. In this book, I added many quotes. I'm a huge fan of letting ancient, brilliant teachers speak and express the eternal truth in their own words. A well-known study asked people in their later years about their biggest regrets in life. These are the 5 most common regrets of the dying: working too hard, not staying in touch with friends, not living a life true to oneself, not expressing their true feelings, and not allowing themselves to be happier. Yet the greatest tragedy in life is not any of these. The greatest tragedy in life is going through life, living and dying, without ever truly knowing who you truly are or discovering the self within. The greatest tragedy of all is not realizing the self. Another quote by Ramana Maharshi: "The only useful purpose of this present birth is to realize the self. There is nothing else to do." And then what is self-realization? Here's a story, A Day by Day with Bhagavan, 17-8-48 by A. Devaraja Mudaliar. This morning, a number of Gujarati visitors arrived here, evidently returning from Pondicherry after darshan there on the 15th. One of them asked Bhagavan, "What is meant by self-realization? Materialists say there is no such thing as God or self." Bhagavan said, "Never mind what the materialists or others say, and don't bother about self or God. Do you exist or not? What is your idea of yourself? What do you mean by I?" The visitor said he did not understand by I his body, but something within his body. Thereupon Bhagavan continued, "You concede I is not the body, but something within it. See then from whence the I arises within the body. See whether it arises and disappears or is always present. You admit there is an I which emerges as soon as you wake up, sees the body, the world, and all else, and ceases to exist when you sleep, and that there is another I which exists apart from the body, independently of it, and which alone is with you when the body and the world do not exist for you, as for instance in sleep. Then ask yourself, if you are not the same I during sleep and during the other states, are there two I's? You are the same one person always. Now, which can be real, the I which comes and goes, or the I which always abides? Then you will know that you are the self. This is called self-realization. Self-realization is not, however, a state which is foreign to you, which is far from you, and which has to be reached by you. You are always in that state. You forget it and identify yourself with the mind and its creation. To cease to identify yourself with the mind is all that is required. We have so long identified ourselves with the not mind, not self, that we become and find it difficult to regard ourselves as the self. Giving up this identification with the not self is all that is meant by self-realization. How to realize or make real the self. We have realized, regarded as real, what is unreal, the not self. To give up such false realization is self-realization. And this is a great explanation of and summary of what the self is and what it is not. The self is not the body, not the mind. The self is the awareness beyond the body and the mind. The self is beyond words or descriptions. The self is ineffable. The self is present in deep, dreamless sleep. The self is not one's name or one's self-identification. The self is always abiding, never comes and goes. The self is always happy, tranquil, peaceful, blissful, and full of infinite love and joy. The self is our true nature, and no amount of words or thinking or speaking can ever come close to properly describing it. The self is nothing and everything at the same time. The self is you. Who are you? You are that. When we talk about the self, we're not talking about the mind that masquerades itself as the self, but the calm, abiding witness that exists as pure awareness, that has no voice and no words, and no amount of talking or thinking can show one its truth. In fact, it takes one further away from the eternal truth of one's existence the more thinking and speaking done to try and describe the self. This eternal self that resides in each of us goes by many names. The Gnostics call it the divine spark. The Hindus call it Atman or the self. And in this book, we will refer to it as the self and the divine spark for the most part. This self is ever present, was never born, and will never die. This self, which is you, is ever abiding in happiness, tranquility, serenity, and infinite love, which is bliss. It is simply the mind that covers up the true self. The mind is the only cause of suffering. Without the mind, no problem. With the mind, all problem. Later we will examine in full detail how to realize that which we already are. We will discuss how to dissolve, quiet, and silence the mind to realize itself, and once the seed has been planted, the tree will grow in time. Once one has a taste or glimpse of the self, it will never be forgotten, and one will wish to experience the self more and more until one fully realizes the self. May this book help those that desire to know the self get exactly just that. Only the self can give man reprieve from the bondage of suffering imposed on them, and only the self can give eternal freedom and liberation. The self is your very nature. You are that. Then, chapter 1. Know thyself, Socrates. And here's a quote from Jesus in the Gospel of Thomas, number 3. When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are children of the living Father. But if you do not know yourselves, then you live in poverty, and you are the poverty. Here's a verse from the Bhagavad Gita 5:16. But ignorance is destroyed by the knowledge of the self within. The light of this knowledge shines like the sun, revealing the supreme Brahman, which is the self. Many ancient teachings emphasize knowing oneself. They state that if one truly knows oneself, one knows the secrets of the universe. If one knows oneself, one knows God, which is the self. These traditions present the knowledge of one's true self as the most profound secret of existence, and indeed it is. The self is the entire universe. It is everything, and you are that. The ancient mystery schools of Egypt taught this, the ancient Greeks taught this, even the secret Gnostic teachings attributed to Jesus expressed this through the concept of gnosis. The Greek philosopher Pythagoras declared, "Man, know thyself, then thou shalt know the universe and God." At the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, Greece, an oracle established around 548 BC, there is a famous ancient Greek inscription which translates into English as "know thyself." The entire path of self-realization can be summed up in those two words, know thyself. They carry exactly the same meaning as realize the self. Many of the ancient philosophers, from Socrates to Plato to Aristotle to Pythagoras and much more, taught the importance of knowing oneself. Even before the Temple of Apollo was built, across the Mediterranean at the Temple of Luxor in Egypt, estimated to have been built in the year 1400 BCE, there's an inscription on the walls of the temple that says, "Man, know thyself and thou shalt know the gods." The date of the Temple of Luxor predates the Temple of Apollo by almost 1,000 years, and some researchers say this know thyself is inscribed on most temples in Egypt. It seems as though the Greek teachings of know thyself in Greece could have been modeled after the teachings in Egypt. According to Greek historian Herodotus, when the original Temple of Apollo at Delphi burned down in 548 BC, the Egyptian king Amasis contributed a massive sum, nearly 3 times the amount, towards the construction of the new temple. Some scholars suggest that the Delphic oracle and its associated wisdom may have been an extension, or at least strongly influenced, by the ancient mystery schools of Egypt. If we dig further, we find that many prominent Greeks did indeed travel to Egypt to study, including Thales of Miletus, Solon, Pythagoras, Plato, Herodotus, Eudoxus, and many more. Thales of Miletus was one of the 7 sages of Greece, and is sometimes credited with the maxim, "Know thyself," that was inscribed at Delphi. But the rabbit hole goes even deeper. When we examine the earliest written references to the true self, we discover they appear in the ancient Vedic texts of India, particularly the Rig Veda. This collection is traditionally dated to around 1500 to 1200 BCE, with some scholars in Indian traditions placing its origins as early as 3000 to 4000 BCE or even earlier. In the Rig Veda, the true self is called Atman, the inner essence, the eternal observer, pure awareness, the divine spark, the real I behind all experience. Atman is none other than our true self. If we examine the origin of the word gnosis and gnothi in Greek, it stems from the Sanskrit word jnana, meaning knowledge or to know. Jnana, Jnana, can be summarized as know thyself. This self-knowledge is a central theme in the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita and the Upanishads, and is just touched upon in some parts of the Rig Veda. If we look at one of the earliest writings of the real self, we can see it here in the Rig Veda. From 1.164.20 through 22, we have the story of the 2 birds. 2 birds associated together and mutual friends take refuge in the same tree. One of them eats the sweet fig, the other, abstaining from food, merely looks on. Where the smooth gliding rays, cognizant, distill the perpetual portion of water, there has the Lord and steadfast protector all beings accepted me though immature in wisdom. In the tree which has smooth gliding rays, feed on the sweet, enters and again bring forth light over all. They have called the fruit sweet, but he partakes not of it who knows not the protector of the universe. The first bird represents the individual soul, the personal self imbued with the feminine Shakti nature, the dynamic energy of the divine. Drawn to the fruits of the tree, symbolizing sensual pleasures, that bird becomes distracted, forgets their true nature, and seeks enjoyment independently of the whole. This apparent separation marks a kind of spiritual death and symbolizes a soul's descent into the world of material existence marked by birth, death, disease, and aging. The second bird represents the Atman, the true eternal self. It does not partake of the fruit, for the self is not an enjoyer of objects. It is the very fullness for which all seeking longs. It is complete, whole, and self-luminous. This ancient allegory closely parallels the story of the Garden of Eden, where Adam and Eve's fall similarly symbolizes the descent from unity into duality, materialism, and sensual pleasure. It is possible that the Eden narrative itself echoes this far older teaching of the two birds and the soul's fall from grace into identification with the material world, or duality. Later we have the Vedic Upanishad, Mundak Upanishad, dated 400 to 300 BCE, that talks of the same ancient metaphor with its meaning. On the same tree, a person sits grieving, drowned in sorrow, bewildered, feeling helpless. When they see the other powerful Lord, content, sees his greatness, they are freed from suffering. When the seer sees the brilliant Maker and the Lord as the Self, who has their source in Brahman, then they are wise, they shake off good and evil, stainless, they reach the highest equanimity. From the Mundaka Upanishad 3.1.2 through 3. This is a direct continuation of the same teaching, and its deepest meaning is that of self-realization. When one realizes self, they are freed from suffering, become wise, they shake off good and evil, become stainless, and reach the highest equanimity. This is the self. The self is also called Brahman or Atman in Vedic texts, but they are all one and the same, and you are that. A famous saying from the Rig Veda 1.164.46, the wise speak of what is one in many ways. This is referring to the wise that speak of the true self or the Atman in many ways, and often mysterious ways. That's really the gist of the Upanishads and their secret teachings. Tons of different ways of teaching the same truth of our true nature, our true self, in many different ways. We will go over many of those different ways to share this same truth. This same truth appears across ancient cultures and civilizations, from India to Greece to Egypt and even China, in the teachings of Taoism. Either this knowledge spread outward from a common source, perhaps the Vedic tradition, or enlightened sages in different lands independently discovered the same eternal, universal truth. Either way, the core realization remains almost identical in all. There is some evidence to support that the Vedic teachings and Vedic wisdom reached Egypt and India and China. India may have been the origin of the teachings of Know Thyself. The evidence for this comes from many rituals, ceremonies, gods, and the language in Egypt that seem to have Vedic similarities, in addition to goods traded such as spices and the possible bloodline of ancient Indian people that have intermingled with the Egyptians. We have another fascinating connection between Egypt and India in the great hymn to the Aten by Akhenaten of Egypt, who reigned in Egypt from 1353 to 1336 BCE. This hymn is also strikingly similar to Psalm 104 in the Old Testament. What makes it even more interesting is that King Akhenaten may have derived his great hymn from the Rig Vedic hymn 1.50 and 4.13 and 10.37. This is one direct piece of evidence among many that demonstrates India's influence on Egypt. There are numerous such parallels between India and Egypt. One can read more about them in the works of Aryanova and on the Hindu Wisdom website listed in the references. This material is so extensive that it alone could fill many pages of books. Let us dive a little deeper. One potential theory regarding the connection between ancient Egypt and ancient India lies in the Indus Valley civilization, which has centered primarily in what is now modern-day Pakistan. This ancient civilization may date back as far as 8000 BCE, or even further according to recent 2016 studies on the artifacts found there. This would predate Egypt, Mesopotamia, and all the world's civilizations, quite possibly. One such theory is that these ancient peoples of India left their homeland to search for a better place, only to come back to India while leaving their impressions throughout the world. Even the Great Pyramids of Egypt have a relationship to India, with the construction appearing to be based on Vastu Shastra, which is an ancient science of design and architecture according to some scientists. There is also what appears to be a sphinx located in the region once occupied by the Indus Valley civilization, strikingly similar to the Egyptian sphinx, situated in Balochistan, Pakistan at Hingol National Park. Another intriguing claim is that an inscription from the Bhagavad Gita was allegedly found on the step pyramid of Dozier at Saqqara, not far from the Giza pyramids. The cited verse is from the Bhagavad Gita 2.22. As a person puts on a new garment, gives up old ones, the self similarly accepts new material bodies, giving up the old and useless ones. According to some reports, the inscribed slab was taken to a British museum and later sold to a private collector from a blog. This comes from a blog written by Ramanan. Some researchers suggest that mainstream archaeology and Egyptology may suppress evidence of ancient Indian influences on Egypt in order to preserve the traditional narrative and mystique surrounding the pyramids. The core message of the verse allegedly found on the step pyramid at Saqqara concerns the eternal nature of the true self, the Atman, and its relationship to the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, known in Sanskrit as samsara, or reincarnation. This raises the question, why was it inscribed on the pyramid? Were there other inscriptions from ancient Vedic texts that were deliberately erased or kept hidden? That is quite possible. There seems to be a systematic effort to de-Vedify the Egyptian pyramids and Egyptian civilization in general. History, after all, has largely been written by conquerors and shaped to serve their own purposes and interests. The suppression of the Vedic connection between Egypt and India seems to be one deliberate reshaping. The date of the completion of the step pyramid from which the verse of the Bhagavad Gita was found is 2648 BCE, yet the date, according to modern scholars of the Bhagavad Gita, is 200 to 100 BCE. And the oldest physical text that we have dates from 1492 AD, held at a library in Oxford. Was the inscription written later after the construction of the step pyramid, or was it placed there during its construction and dating we have? And maybe the dating that we have of the Bhagavad Gita is incorrect. Many ancient Indian texts may be far older than previously thought. These teachings and stories were initially transmitted orally and only written down much later, meaning they could be significantly older than we typically give them credit for. In his book, Return of the Aryans from 1994, Bhagwan Gidwani speculates that Indian civilization could be traced back to 8,000 BCE. He argues that the British deliberately created the myth that Indians have always been ruled by foreigners, thereby distorting their tradition, their true history. Gidwani further asserts that the Vedas were composed around 4000 BCE, which is much earlier than traditional scholars claim, and this would predate the pyramids of Egypt by more than 500 years. A more popular theory as to the roots of ancient Egypt lies in the ancient lost civilization of Atlantis. Some scholars speculate that Egypt was found by ancient Atlanteans. There appears to be much more evidence for Egypt's Indian roots than there is for its Atlantean roots. There is only a small amount of historical evidence we have for that and indirect evidence, but with Indian roots we have direct evidence, direct connections, direct a lot of things. Even the Egyptian language and writings is similar to Sanskrit. The name Egypt may have come from the Sanskrit word Ajap. The Nile River may have come from the Sanskrit word for blue, which is Nila, Nile, Nila. The great Egyptian ruler Ramses' name may have come from the Hindu god Rama. There are many undeniable similarities across the board between India and Egypt, including many of the gods. Now, Takshashila. Before we finish off this chapter on the history of the self and know thyself, which can consume many books, we must talk about a couple of the most interesting and incredible places of learning in all of antiquity. The first place was the premier learning center of the world, starting around 600 BCE and lasting for almost 1,000 years. The name of this center is called Takshashila in Sanskrit, and the Greeks called it Taxila. Taxila lies in what is now modern-day northern Pakistan, smack dab at the crossroads of the Silk Road that divide the east and the west. Taxila was a haven for learning and teaching and the spreading of Vedic knowledge that cultivated into a mix of world knowledge that spread around the globe. At the time, Taxila was the main seed that planted the knowledge of the self to the world as far east as China, as far west to Greece and beyond. Taxila was humongous, with close to 10,000 students learning more than 60 different topics, from science to medicine to arts to everything. These students would go on to shape the world, driving major advancements in science and academia, as well as what we focused on here. self-realization. Students from across the world studied at Taxila, including Greeks, Babylonians, Chinese, Egyptians, Arabs, Turks, and many others. Many ancient Greek thinkers are said to have studied at Taxila. Among the most notable are Pythagoras, Thales, Empedocles, Democritus, and Plato, all of whom are rumored to have traveled there for instruction. In his writings, Philostratus mentions that Pythagoras studied with naked sages in India. It is even suggested that Pythagoras derived his famous theorem from the Vedic Baudhayana Soba Sutra. It is quite possible that many of the brilliant Greek scholars of the time obtained a significant portion of their knowledge from India as Hindu philosophical and scientific ideas spread widely through Greece. Later, Alexander the Great reached Taxila and conquered the region in 326 BCE. It is said that he took numerous teachers and scholars from Taxila to Greece with him. At the turn of the millennium, even the Apostle Thomas is confirmed by numerous sources to have traveled to India and studied at Taxila. The Gospel of Thomas sounds remarkably similar to the Upanishadic teachings on the self. And that is the first 9 pages of the book, including the introduction and the preface. And thank you for being here. See you on the next one.